The automotive world just got hit with a bombshell that no one saw coming. President Trump has unleashed a jaw-dropping 25% tariff on all imported cars, a move that's sending shockwaves throughout the entire auto industry and beyond. Domestic manufacturers like Ford, GM, and Stellantis saw their stocks crash at the end of last week, as much of their production is outsourced to countries like Mexico and Canada, while many critical parts are made in China. Tesla stock initially actually rose on the news, as it has the most American content of any type of car assembled and sold in the United States, although even Elon Musk admitted that it too remains affected by some imported car parts. The real target appears to be China's surging electric vehicles sector, which is poised to begin flooding markets globally. Both Canada and the US have implemented 100% tariffs on Chinese cars in order to try and delay the inevitable. However, the US has gotten into a trade war with Canada, clashing with its closest automotive partner. Canadian leadership was initially touted for making drastic retaliatory moves. However, the strategy over the past month has oddly shifted to attacking Tesla and barring the electric vehicle maker from various incentives in an attempt to, very indirectly, get back at Trump. However, Trump's new targeted 25% tariffs take aim directly at Canada's vital auto sector, which may soon be teetering on the edge. It's unclear if Canada will survive the chaos or crumble under the weight of Trump's unpredictable tariffs. One thing is undeniable: Trump's aggressive maneuvers are seeking to force a global recalibration as the United States tries to fortify its own automotive industry as it prepares to challenge China's growing dominance. Before we continue, stop using Yahoo Finance, stop using Google Finance, and visit my newly redesigned website, themarketisopen.com, for instant stock quotes and quarterly financial data going back up to 17 years, and it's all freely available. The stakes here couldn't be higher. We're talking about the potential reshaping of the global automotive landscape, with billions of dollars and countless jobs on the line, due to the complex web of tariffs and political maneuvering that's driving this unprecedented conflict. Shortly after becoming president, Trump threatened to impose major blanket tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico, citing that he wanted stronger borders with no more fentanyl or criminals passing through, as both the United States and Canada under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have let in millions of potentially unchecked migrants into the country. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick claims that 75% of criminals that the US has caught have passed through Canada to get into the US. While Canada at first did seem to try and address these concerns after the tariffs were proposed by appointing a fentanyl czar and deploying 2 helicopters along with drones to try and secure the largest border in the world, it appears that retaliatory tariffs have instead taken front and center stage. Canada hit back with surgical tariffs for maximum impact, while trying to minimize the impact on Canadians, yet inevitably hitting various grocery items, many of which simply can't be grown in Canada affordably, especially during the winter. Even with tariffs aside, the Liberal government under Trudeau introduced an additional carbon tax, raising prices directly on everything from gasoline to natural gas home heating, the former of which indirectly affects the country's entire supply chain of goods and services, including food prices, which must still be transported. Even before this new blanket, self-imposed tax was introduced, it's estimated that Canada's GDP per capita over the past 10 years under the Trudeau government has barely grown at all, with inflation completely eating away any potential growth, leaving Canada quite vulnerable, especially to the United States. The Trudeau government has also blocked the construction of new oil and gas pipelines, projects which could take many years to build. Although there may be environmental concerns, oil and gas is still heavily utilized, and a single pipeline is much more efficient than using trucks for transport, and existing pipelines actually run through the United States to get from Western to Eastern Canada. Strangely, however, Liberal government officials in Canada who are in favor of this carbon tax oddly threw the environmental stance out the window and began retaliating against none other than Tesla, an electric vehicle maker, citing that Elon Musk was close with Trump. This is quite indirect if the goal is to go after Trump, as Tesla's total sales in Canada make up roughly 3% of the company's overall sales, and Elon Musk only owns about 13% of Tesla. Even if Tesla stock were to go to zero, Elon Musk's net worth would still be in the hundreds of billions of dollars, thanks to his other companies such as SpaceX, and all of this has nothing to do with Trump. Nevertheless, certain provinces removed Tesla from their lists of companies that get EV rebates. Toronto, the largest city in Canada, the fifth largest city in North America, removed Tesla from their grants program for EVs. Again, these are somewhat obscure but unsurprising moves, as other American companies were left untouched, even though Tesla does employ Canadians and uses Canadian parts and labor to manufacture its vehicles. The anti-Tesla sentiment extended even further, as former resigned Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, who has now been appointed the Minister of Transport, and has proposed tariffing just Tesla vehicles 100% in the recent past, has now banned Tesla from all rebates and is freezing $43 million in rebate-related payments to Tesla after questioning subsidies related to 4,000 EVs that were sold in Quebec in just a few days, although it was known to the public that the rebates were about to disappear, which typically does cause a surge in demand. Teslas have been quite popular in Quebec specifically, as the province is uniquely powered by renewable hydroelectricity. About 94% of its electricity comes from hydro, and Quebec has some of the cheapest electricity prices literally on the planet. Electric vehicles are highly encouraged, as up until the end of last year, Quebec boosted the federal government's $5,000 EV rebate by another $7,000 on certain EV models, including some Teslas. While the Quebec rebate has been reduced and the federal one ran out of money, electric vehicles in Quebec are hugely beneficial since electricity prices are so low and gas prices are exceptionally high. However, in an astounding turn of events, Trump has now proposed a devastating 25% tariff on all imported vehicles into the United States. This largely affects Canada, which has had extremely close ties with US auto manufacturing. About a month after these tariffs go into effect, the parts of vehicles will be tariffed as well, which could be even more devastating as the value chain is transported back and forth between the two countries up to 6 times, potentially being tariffed from both ends every time. While Canada has elections coming up at the end of April, Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has resigned after a 10-year term, leaving appointed Prime Minister Mark Carney in his place. Carney just astounded Canadians after 10 days on the job, as he claimed that the old relationship between the US and Canada's close economic integration, tight security, and military cooperation is now over. However, it may instead be time for Canada to rethink their stance and consider renegotiating with the United States instead of aimlessly fighting back. The US GDP is roughly 15 times the size of Canada's, and the entire automotive sector makes up only 4% of US GDP, and half of that number is already made in America. For Canada, automotive makes up 20%, or 1/5 of all manufacturing trade. The US is in a very strong position here. As a matter of fact, this new tariff effectively takes on the entire world at once, not just Canada, and still only represents a small fraction of US GDP, while having devastating effects on those countries who sell cars into the US. It's important to realize that China, the largest car market in the world, is now dominated by its own players, where traditional automakers, such as the largest manufacturer, Volkswagen, are constantly losing share in the Chinese market. It was announced that VW was just replaced this year by BYD as the leader in Chinese sales in China. The US is the second largest car market in the world and has been fairly open, which means that's where most automakers will gravitate to sell their cars. While some countries do have excess tariffs, such as India for example, which adds tariffs of up to 125% onto US vehicles, while the US doesn't reciprocate. And the US has imposed 100% tariffs on China, while China has some tariffs in addition to requiring US companies to partner with local companies to do business in China in the first place. All of these tariffs are merely delaying the inevitable, which is that China will ultimately sell its vehicles globally and destroy existing car companies. While it's true that consumers would benefit from cheap cars, Losing an entire industry could be far more devastating when considering the millions of direct jobs and indirect jobs that would be affected. Consider that in 2008, GM alone was considered too big to fail. While Trump doesn't want to let that happen, about a quarter of cars produced in Mexico are now made by Chinese companies, and these cars are finding their way into the US. Although China has taken over as the largest global car market, selling over 31 million cars per year, compared to the US's 16 million, it's important to realize that the US shouldn't be counted out just yet. The average price of a passenger car in China is just $23,000 US, while in the US the average price is $48,000, more than double, suggesting that the dollar opportunity in each country is still roughly equal, allowing the US to still have massive leverage in the global playing field. Mysteriously, while Trump has indeed been unpredictable and tough on Canada, he's gotten back a ferocious response from Canadian leaders. Yet, China has also recently imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, yet frighteningly, government leaders have been silent about this. Something is happening with China, and the biggest loser could be the US if China wins. And so Trump is saying that these new tariffs are here to stay, in order to signal that companies can and should make long-term investments into the US in order to build domestically and thereby bypass the tariffs. The US needs to insource manufacturing as best as possible, as currently relies too heavily on China, which won't end well in the years to come if something isn't done today. It might be painful in the near term, as the situation has already gotten out of hand from the US's perspective. But if China wins the global vehicle market, it will be even more painful for the US to lose its auto manufacturers and the direct and indirect jobs that support the industry. Most countries need the US as a market to sell their goods into, which currently gives the United States the upper hand in this trade war. While tariffs are said not to work and are blamed for prolonging the Great Depression in the 1930s, the world is very different today than it was back then, and the US is much stronger and more independent. While technology has redefined the playing field, innovations in robotics and manufacturing could minimize the labor cost advantage that countries like China have over the US. Technically, making products locally, all else being equal, should be far cheaper than transporting them halfway around the world. Nevertheless, it's impossible for the US to do everything on its own. They actually need all the help they can get. The threat of tariffs may actually create more opportunity for investments and negotiations. The UK, for example, is already said to be negotiating with the US with regards to these tariffs that Trump said won't go away. If the right deal is made, then the tariffs will likely come off. And while Canada calls itself the US's closest ally, counterintuitively, Trump needs that relationship to be even stronger and have Canada siding with the US rather than with China. And so while prices may rise for some vehicles within the United States in the short term, not everything may be completely negative. Trump appears to want to strike long-term deals and investments within the US from other countries, which would actually bring them even closer together in the hopes that the United States can reinvigorate its auto manufacturing businesses, bring things back in-house, and once again become a powerful rival to China in an attempt to benefit the US in the long term. If the United States doesn't bite the bullet sooner rather than later, China could win the global car market faster than people believe, and massive chunks of US auto could be lost and never come back. So what do you think will happen with the trade war between Canada and the United States? Could it be resolved with the two countries collaborating even more closely than ever before? Or has the relationship been damaged forever? And will the United States be able to insource vehicle components and garner enough investments to strengthen and upgrade its vehicle factories in order to take on China in the global playing field? Don't forget to watch my last video on the beginnings of the recent US-China trade war. Visit our new website, themarketisopen.com. Please hit the like button and subscribe. We would really appreciate that. And a huge shout out to all of our patrons that help to support our channel. Your support helps us to continue to make great content. Thank you guys so much for watching.